All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special commentary track for the film Critters 2, The Main Course. My name is Michael Felsher. I'm the owner and operator of Red Shirt Pictures, and I have with me here today the film's director, Mr. Mick Garris. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've been looking forward to this one for a while because, strangely enough, we've interviewed a couple of times. I've interviewed you, or done a couple of things like that, but I've never done a commentary track with you. And
yeah, that's right.
this one is, I feel, most appropriate to do as it marks your feature film directing debut.
That's right. And it's usually referred to as the timeless classic Critters 2, but I can understand you leaving that out for purposes of time.
I'm trying not to suck up to you too much right away. I want to save that for a little bit later. But as a matter of fact, this is, and I'm going to go on record saying this is my favorite of the four Critters movies.
Oh, thank you.
And I wanted to, before we get into the making of the movie, which I'm sure you have plenty of stories, as I know you always do, what led to you making this as your directorial debut?
Well, this was the first greenlit feature ever offered to me. I was starting to have quite a good deal of luck and success as a screenwriter, starting first with Steven Spielberg on Amazing Stories. So suddenly, people who would never even read my scripts were still not reading the scripts, but I'd been knighted by King Stephen, so they were giving me opportunities. And I was sent things like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and other things, but they were read it and see what you think. This was the first one where they actually came to me and said, we're making this movie, we're offering you the job to rewrite and direct it. Would you like to do that? And that's a rare opportunity. And even though I'd vowed never to do my first movie with difficult things like kids and special effects and low budget and all of that together, it's what happened. And so I decided to take the leap.
Was there any reticence on your part in terms of directing a sequel to a film that you were not involved with?
It actually made it a little bit easier, and I had been writing movies with numbers in the title, like The Fly 2, things like that. But it really freed me a bit. The movie was mildly successful, found greater success on home video. And so there wasn't really a whole lot to follow up with. And then I read the script by David Twohy, and it was quite clever and smart. And it was something, I could really get into this, and the people at New Line said, do with it what you will as a writer. We really want you to do this. And I think because the original Critters was a Spielbergian kind of influenced movie, that they would hope by hiring somebody who was working with Spielberg on Amazing Stories that maybe a little of that magic would rub off, in a couple of generations there.
So what was New Line Cinema like at this particular time? Because they were just becoming flush with the success of the first couple of Nightmare on Elm Street sequels. So they were beginning their early transition out of being a very scrappy independent outfit to becoming essentially a mini major just a few years later. What was the atmosphere like over there?
Scrappy is the perfect word. By the way, that's my wife Cynthia as Zanti there under all that makeup.
Oh, okay. Oh, really?
So yeah,
You always put her through a lot in terms of the makeup on these shows, man.
yeah, but she has a really good personality. So it was. But yeah, New Line was great. They would give people like me an opportunity to make a debut as a director. So they worked with, veterans like Jack Shoulder. Bob Shea had worked with before and brought him in. They had just done The Hidden. So they were really the place doing genre movies at the time. And Bob Shea was a guy who was willing to gamble. It was his idea to do The Lord of the Rings as a trilogy and spend all of that money from an independent company that had not had a lot of money. So it was a great place to work, and I got a great deal of encouragement from them, and I owe them a lot. That first, busting your cherry as a director is quite a difficult thing to achieve, and so that was a wall that he allowed me to break down.
So, but in terms of being a first-time director, I mean, this wasn't the first time you had been in the director's chair. You had done television work before this.
Yeah.
So you had, it certainly wasn't like you were thrown into the deep end, but what were the unique pressures of doing a feature film as compared to what you had done before?
Well, what I'd done before was an episode of Amazing Stories, and before that, a Disney Sunday movie called Fuzz Bucket. They were on a very tight schedule. You know, you're doing one episode followed by another episode followed by another episode, and using the same crew and all this. I was able to bring in my own cameraman, the production designer, all these people who would work on just the one project. But I was definitely thrown into the deep end because of, you know, this was a $4 million that was trying to be a $20 million movie, a $4 million movie versus 20. And all of these effects were things I had not really done before. I knew about them and had studied them and had been a journalist and interviewed people who did visual effects for Star Wars and things like that. But this was definitely learn while you earn kind of situation. And getting really good people to do it. You know, this shot, for example, illustrates a great DP. Russell Carpenter was a guy who had done The Woman in White with Frank LaLoggia, and I thought he was fantastic. And then he went on to win the Oscar for shooting Titanic. So
Yeah.
I was able to get really good people at a time in their career where they were at the same place I was, just kind of ready to take a bigger step and try and make a movie that was bigger than it needed to be.
So the script is credited to D.T. Toohey,
Right.
also known as David Toohey, who's gone on to do Pitch Black and the Riddick films and has had quite a career of his own.
Lots of
How
stuff.
much interaction did you have with David after you got the job, or was it pretty much left up to you to do the rewrite?
David was finished. He told Bob Shea that you know, this is the script and this is the script you should shoot, and they did not agree. By the way, that's my stepfather and my brother in the lower left-hand corner of the frame there. You try and do what you can with family and friends, and that is Lou Zamperini, about whom the movie Unbroken was made. The guy
wow.
playing
Wow.
checkers with the cowboy hat. That's my father-in-law.
Oh my God.
Anyway, so that's a real little gem of arcane knowledge there.
Yeah.
So this,
I'm sorry, but go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say this town we built in Santa Clarita, north of Los Angeles. It was still within the 30-mile zone where the Screen Actors Guild allows you to work without having to pay people to put them up overnight. And all of this was built on a shooting range, a practice range. There were just kind of low blockade buildings, concrete buildings, and then the production designer, Phil, created all of these amazing buildings. This budget somehow accommodated this. We built that newspaper office. We built the church. All of these things, and my marching orders were really, I love the idea of taking Norman Rockwell to hell. You know, we talked about that a little on Sleepwalkers, but it's a favorite theme of mine. It's a very Stephen King kind of thing to do, is take the idealized vision of small-town America and set it asunder.
Well, that was the thing I was going to ask about. I knew you had filmed in Santa Clarita, but I had just assumed at some point you had taken over at least a part of a small town or something.
Nope.
But looking at it now, it is almost prototypical Main Street, like small town America. I mean, this is almost like if Norman Rockwell had been a production designer, this is what he would have come up with.
Exactly. And things like, Lynn Shea here, it's the first
Yep.
time I worked with her, and that's Bob Shea's sister, Bob Shea, the head of New Line. This was one of her early performances, but just, it is so Lynn Shea, and she had so much to do with designing her costume choices and the makeups and everything, that primary red lipstick and all of that. She is a total character and so much fun to work with. And Sam Anderson,
she's been having a hell of a career renaissance of late.
no kidding, all those James Wan spin-offs and everything. She's
Yeah.
really something, and it's really great to see that happen.
And then you had Sam Anderson there in the scene, another great character actor.
Yeah, who is also in The Stand. Who I worked with him later in the Stand miniseries, and he was also in the original version of the Michael Jackson movie that I was shooting before it got finished. So Sam was a part of that as well.
You have a knack for casting your films with really great character actors, even in tiny roles that are maybe only on screen for just a few minutes. But you put people in there who have very distinctive looks or faces, or just bring something to the roles that getting someone just off the street wouldn't have been able to do.
Well,
How important is casting it for you when in a film like this?
well, hugely important, and thanks for noticing because, for me, if an actor just has a few lines, if you feel like he existed before and exists after, he
Right,
fills that
right.
up. And with faces that are interesting and just somebody who brings something to the party more than just his acting ability. A personality is really important. And so, I mean, Herta Ware was Will
Oh yeah.
Geer's widow, and she was amazing. The Theatricum Botanicum is this open-air Shakespearean theater in Topanga Canyon that they did for years. And so I think she was 80 at the time we did this. And
Wow.
just amazing to work with. And again, brings something to her. And Mr. Quigley here was the head of a theater group in Orange County, and what he brings to this character is so much fun. And I hate teenagers is a favorite line of mine for a movie aimed at teenagers.
And Douglas Rowe, yeah, he's still active. He's still out there working.
He's really a treasure, and he was so much fun. He had not done much film work at this time, mostly theater work. And like I said, he was the head of the theater company. But he embraced this, and I think he's so great. And coming up here, speaking of character actors, Barry Corbin is one of
Oh,
the greats of all time. I had, seen him doing television and movies and the like, but there were issues with J.T. Walsh in the.
you mean M. Emmett Walsh?
I mean, yeah, sorry. Two
Yeah,
different
if
actors.
you want to just
Yeah.
rephrase, you can just rephrase.
Okay, well, there were issues with Emmett Walsh. I don't think he was the easiest guy in the world to work with. So in Critters 1, so when Sheriff Harv played a critical role in Critters 2, the decision was made that they wanted to go with somebody else. And once I met Barry Corbin, I just flipped for him. He's so great. That accent is real. He's a wonderful, committed actor and really funny by playing it straight. And
Yeah.
in No Country for Old Men, he's just magnificent. He's got such range, all within this Texas-Oklahoma sensibility, but there's so much to him and so much depth to him that I was so happy to see him later on do the Coen Brothers movie. It's just so rich and deep, and to see him dig his teeth into a role like that is such a pleasure for me.
There's that great line he has. It's like, the more I was spent trying to get back what's lost, the more he's going out the door.
Yes.
And he
yeah.
he delivers that like a guy who has lived that for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, I mean, the weight that he
just-
carries as a human being and as an actor, the veracity that he brings to a role is great. And again, here's another location that was built, but I think the shell of this barn was here on a location, and this was not in Santa Clarita. This was another location. But the way it was dressed out and everything, Philip Dean Foreman did just a remarkable job as production designer with not much to work with. Though the original Critters, I think, cost about $2 million. This one cost about $4 million, and the scope is obviously much larger.
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of interior scenes, but there's just a lot of outdoor shooting, and that is
Yes.
always going to raise problems because you can't control the weather. You can't control what you're going to deal with on set. What were the weather conditions like out there?
Well, I'll tell you, and this will come up later, but it was the coldest winter in 100 years when we shot
Of
the
course.
scene of the playmate scene was
Oh,
the coldest day in 100 years in Southern California. So it was like 22 degrees or something like that. And she had to do the nude scene, and it was really a remarkable experience, but we'll get to that when it pops up. So this was fun shooting spaceship scenes, and Don Opper was one of the producers.
Right.
Show Films was he and his brother Barry were partners in that with Rupert and who was the other? There were 3 partners in it, and Terrence Mann was big on Broadway,
Right.
and
right.
he'd established his role as the bounty hunter in the original Critters, but this one didn't have the rock and roll performances in it, but he had the rock and roll air and attitude.
Oh, yeah.
And just really so much fun to work with somebody like that who had been a stage performer. And Don was such a personality. He was really Charlie personified in a lot of ways, except very smart and very candid, but eccentric.
Well, Charlie, he's sort of the heart of the film at the end of the day, because his arc he's returning back, but he doesn't really want to go. At the end, he decides not to leave, to go back, and he's just, you really have a lot of emotional investment in him.
Well, that's one of the things that was in the original script, and what I hope that I brought to it as well is that you give a shit about these people. Horror movies, especially 80s horror movies, were not often very character-oriented. And yes, this gets broad at times, and it's really my only comedy I've ever done. But if you don't care about the characters, and that Charlie character, at the end, I get misty when Charlie's taking over the town, when he comes back and he's made sheriff and all of that.
Yeah.
But then there's Eddie Deason. And this is our introduction to Eddie, and Eddie is exactly what you see on screen. He's got the gun with the bounty hunter thing, and I'm showing him how to use it, and I just said, do not pull this trigger until we're rolling. And what, you mean this one here? And bang! Oops. I know he didn't mean to, but... And Scott Grimes, of course, in the original and in this one, he really has matured in the couple of years since the first one was made. And has become a really wonderful actor, doing Band of Brothers and things like that, beyond some really high-end television and feature work, too. He's really become quite more than that 16-year-old kid talking about Jimmy Olsen with breasts here. Yeah.
Well, what was interesting, the character we just saw back there is sort of the typical bully you would see in films like this, the character Wesley that Tom Hodges plays.
Yeah, Tommy was great. Yeah.
But you know what? You end up having some kind of sympathy for the guy at the end. You don't turn him into a real serious threat. He's just sort of an annoyance. But by the end of it, you're just kind of like, oh, this poor schmuck.
Yeah, well, everybody's on the same team when you've got an invasion of toothy porcupines.
Right.
And, he decides he's going to take part. He's going to try and help. Not very well, doesn't provide much assistance. But, he ends up caring, in the scene in the church. Everybody kind of comes together to face a common enemy.
Right.
The equivalent to us all coming together to face off against our president right now. So, but we'll leave that for later. Yeah.
That's our political statement for the commentary.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is an idealized America, and the idealized America is where everybody joins together and has a common bond, rather than everybody in fraying ends of the rope. Right. And I loved in the theater with the 4 people who were there on opening day watching as Mr. Quigley takes the mouthful of the dog food, and they're it's really a can of chili, but it looks
I would
like
hope
dog
so.
food.
God,
Yeah.
I would,
Hey, it's all chopped up meat anyway, says the vegan
That's true.
director.
It's not that far removed. So.
Not that far at all. Is this corned beef hash or is this dog food? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if the label wasn't on it, would you really know the difference?
Exactly.
So in terms of balancing the humor and the horror, this movie has a very delicate line to walk, because it's got a very sunny attitude, But
Yeah.
at the times it does tend to get a little dark, but then not so dark that it strays into, uncomfortable territory. So how difficult was that for you to sort of navigate, to try to figure out when do I really put the horror on, when do I pull back? When if I half-ass it too much on either side, then you dilute both. What was the challenge for you on that?
Well, that was the biggest challenge of all because most horror comedies, this isn't, I wouldn't call it a horror comedy, but I think it's a horror
No.
movie with a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
Most horror comedies are neither funny nor scary. They cancel
Exactly.
each other out. And I was very cognizant of that. I just wanted to take this seriously. And yeah, some of the characterizations, like Eddie Deason and Don Opper and the like, are a little bigger than life. And some things are played with a little sense of exaggeration, like Nana and things like that. But all of it is played straight. All of it, you treat the drama like drama, and you take the horror very seriously. And Alfred Hitchcock was a master at setting something up and knocking it down with a sense of humor after he paid
Right.
off something really suspenseful. And the point is to leave the comedy behind when you're doing something serious, unless it is so outrageous, like the giant critter ball shredding a body and leaving a skeleton
Right.
behind as it rolls over, is grotesque, but it's also really funny in a very dark humored way. But to set up the tension and take it seriously and not be afraid of shedding a little blood when you've got, treat the horror like a horror movie. And even though we got a PG-13, we really stretch the boundaries. You're setting up the Easter Bunny, and he's hopping and jumping, and the music is comical and all.
Yeah.
And then, wham, these Easter Bunny eggs go through, and oh, that's hilarious. They jump in, and they're chewing on his nards, and then you cut inside the church, and when he crashes through and the blood pours from his mouth, it's a horrific moment after setting up something quite comedic. And that counterpoint, I think, works. Take the comedy seriously, play it for real, but give it the heightened sense that it needs. And the same thing with the horror. It all needs to be wrapped into drama. So you can't think it's one thing or the other. It's all played like Shakespeare, if that makes sense.
For you, in terms of working in horror, because you've had a connection to horror and sci-fi dating back as far as the very beginning of your career. I mean, you did, making of featurettes and documentaries on The Thing, and a lot of those early films that influenced me when I was growing up. And it was something that you've stayed with your entire career. And so I can really admire something like Critters 2, where I don't feel there is a director who's kind of working or playing down to the material, or just kind of like, and I've seen that in a lot of horror films over the past, my whole life, where you can tell the director's just kind of like, I don't really care about this genre, but it's a gig, and I'll just kind of, but you have a very reverential, very affectionate feeling towards the genre, it seems, overall. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I respect it. I've been a horror fan all along, and it is truly an entry for a lot of filmmakers. Make a horror movie that's successful and you'll be able to move on. Often the opposite is true. Well, here's one that starts out funny again and then bites off the end of his foot, and it's not quite so funny. But playing the horror for real. But yeah, I really respect it. I think there's so much potential creativity in the horror genre because it's drama plus. It has to be good drama, and then on top of that, it has to add the sense of confronting fears and the like. But yeah, there's nothing that disappoints me more than going to a movie and I can tell the filmmaker does not respect the material and feels like he's slumming and is doing gutter work. Because that's how the studios consider it. Its value is making money for them. It's not making something special. But then you see something like A Quiet Place. John Krasinski was not a horror fan at all, but he watched all the right movies and he became one. And you can tell the passion for creating a sense of dread and fear was fantastic, and the way he executed it was great. Here's a guy who made his bones as a sitcom actor, directed a
Right.
couple of non-genre movies, romantic comedy, that sort of thing, and then just blew me away with this, a PG-13 horror film that was scary and dense and intelligent and compelling.
Yeah.
And that's a guy respecting the genre. It's even got monsters in it, but it's a great film. And that is important because there are people who just do it as a gig or as an opportunity to move on to something bigger. But the reverse is true too. If you have success within the genre, particularly the horror genre, it can often become your ghetto or your jail cell. That has definitely been a part. I love lots of genre,
Yeah.
including the horror genre, and would love to work outside of that and have a couple of times, but not that often because you get thought of as a horror director, and that can limit your career. Luckily, I love the genre, so I don't resent that appellation being applied to me. But there are people who do resent it and resist it. Christopher Lee hated that people thought of him as Dracula because he had so many other roles he thought were more important to him personally. But,
Right.
To have success at all is such a long shot that
Right.
if you don't embrace it, you're really kind of missing out and making a part of your life something that could be a lot happier.
Well, I remember talking to George Romero many times about this, and he was like, "Look, I'm not saying I wouldn't like to go and direct A Tree Grows in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
but they're not going to give me the money for that, and it's so hard to get money to get a film made is a Herculean effort. If they're willing to finance something, of mine that has zombies in it, I'll tell my stories using the zombies.
Yeah, well,
You
and
know,
that was even a bigger jail cell because not only was he a horror director, he was a zombie movie director.
right? Exactly.
And he
yeah.
couldn't even move outside of that subgenre. And he was a guy who was a terrific filmmaker who
Oh,
really knew
yeah.
what he was doing with actors, with the building of tension and storytelling and all that stuff. But he had to have the rotting undead in everything he made.
So you have this wonderful scene here where, again, you've seen that the critters are vicious. So there's a point to establishing the critters as, real threats so that you can buy into the tension of a scene like this.
Yeah, this was one of the centerpiece scenes for me, child threatened and using this wide lens, which became something I've used a lot before and since, but then playing to a joke. Suddenly it looks around and the foot comes and squashes and the goo and everything, it's a suspense scene that turns into a joke. And I really enjoyed playing with the sense of humor. There's humor in a lot of the stuff I do. We did build
sure.
that. We built that church from scratch, by the way.
Wow.
Interior and exterior. It was a practical set. But yeah, the opportunity to do something funny where there is genuine comedy in it. I've done it once more in one of the Quicksilver Highway segments, but for the most part, it's just injecting some humor into horror and drama rather than it being one of the main raison d'etre in the whole film like it is with this. And this is much more comedic than the first Critters was. That movie played much more seriously, but this was an opportunity, well, to work with Easter, where you think of primary colors and candy colors and a whole sense of humor. This whole Norman Rockwell setting and the like was an opportunity that begged for humor. And of course, Gremlins had come out, and this is a
Right.
sequel to a low-budget ripoff of Gremlins, it might be said. But the Warner Brothers cartoon aspects of Gremlins were something I wanted to embrace as well because that was something I was raised on, and there are definitely elements of that that come up in some of the critter attack scenes, particularly in the Hungry Heifer scene.
Yeah. Speaking of the Hungry Heifer, the jingle, the Hungry Heifer
Yes.
jingle that
Yep.
we've heard in the film. When I first saw this movie back in '88 when it came out, that jingle did not leave my head for approximately 3.5 years.
Great,
It was about
earworm.
that
Yeah.
length of time before I was able to finally let it go. And having worked on this Blu-ray project again, I imagine it's probably going to take another 5 to 6
Yeah.
for it to come out again. Could you explain the origin of this jingle? And did
Yes.
you realize that so many people would never be able to get this unbelievably silly song out of their head for the length of time that it has occupied mine? Because I'm not the only one, Mick, I got to tell you.
Well, that makes me very happy. My wife wrote that and is the voice on it, and played bass guitar. When I met her, she was a singer, a songwriter, bass player in a band. And so this was an opportunity for her to come in and do that. And then I'm the voice at the end of the jingle. And, I think I came up with one line: at the Hungry Heifer, we won't give you a bum steer.
Bum steer. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but that is her doing the jingle, which she wrote as well. So I'll have to relay that to her.
Yeah. Tell her thanks.
Thanks, but no thanks. Trying to get
Yeah.
to sleep and got that damn thing running through your head, right?
Yeah, no, seriously, it took a long time for me to be able to let that go. It was, and so that's good. I mean, that's the mark of a good jingle. If you can't get out of your head, no matter how much therapy you have, it doesn't matter. It's going to be in there.
Excellent. That's why we play it at the end, so you're guaranteed not to be
Oh
able
yeah,
to shake it.
yeah.
So
And
I love the
that pissed me
effectiveness-
off too, because it's like, oh good, we're gonna have a reprise of it because I hadn't forgotten about it yet.
I like this little simple effect of the egg looking like it's got life inside. They just put a weight inside that was loose, so that you set the egg down and it would move on its own. So just very low-tech effects in this movie, but a lot of them.
Now watching it again, I'm delighted by the fact that the critters lay all these eggs, and then one by one the town just destroys all of them. It's just like,
Happy Easter.
yeah. Now
my
here we're
most-
coming up on a scene that everybody talks about.
Well, my most overtly comedic scene I've probably ever directed. And it's so silly, and it's just Mr. Grumpy. The actor actually was kind of grumpy too. So I don't know how thrilled he was to play the sheriff in an Easter Bunny suit, but he was great doing it.
Oh, he's terrific. He's great. He's just got the right attitude. It's like
Yeah.
sitting with my.
And the music,
Hollywood.
I'm not much for comedy music usually, hitting the nail on the head so much. But
Right.
Nicholas Pike, this was the first movie I'd ever done with him, and I knew I wanted an organic score, an orchestral score. And we actually have
Right.
a 40-piece non-union orchestra that we recorded in a tiny studio east of L.A. And yeah, that was a reverse gag. That all of those little fur balls were pulled out of the suit, and then we run it in reverse, so they're jumping right in. So again, low tech. And here's silly, funny bunny, all this stuff going on, and they were affrighted. We get biblical, and a nice wide lens exaggerating the face of the minister, giving his fire and brimstone talk. And crash. All of that
He's
joke
when he comes-
goes. It's still funny until what? He's really bloody. So
Yeah.
It's this
Yeah,
turns dark.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And I like that kind of thing. I like switching gears suddenly. There's Lou Zamperini again in the background there with his hand in his pocket and shaking his head.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Unbroken.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's something we never would have thought about back then. But you've had the movie Unbroken came out and has really reignited interest in his story.
Yeah, and people always say, how the hell is Mick Garris an executive producer on a movie that Angelina Jolie directed? Where did that come from? But Scott Grimes and Leanne Curtis were really good together, and Leanne had attained, I don't know if she won an Emmy or was nominated for an Emmy or something in a really major TV movie that got her a lot of attention. And so she's still working. She has a daughter who is a singer-songwriter whose career she's kind of devoted to right now.
Well, she was an interesting choice because she's the quintessential girl next door, but she's not just a damsel in distress in this thing
No.
at all.
And she's
Which I
kind of
really
a tomboy
appreciated.
too. Yeah. She's not the screaming girl.
No,
save me
no.
from the monsters. And that was an
Yeah.
important thing to me. Even 30 years ago, that was an important thing that was not taken very seriously. And it's fun to actually have a little bit of a social conscience without pointing at it when you're making a movie. That especially a genre movie like this, they're the best ways to convey acts of social change or awareness without it being heavy-handed or something. And you just throw it in because it's right.
Did you go back and watch the original Critters a lot before this, or did you really just want to focus on creating your own style and own mood for this?
Well, when it came out, I watched it. I saw it in the theater, of course, just as a film fan and as a genre fan. But when I got the job, I watched it again just to familiarize myself with the characters and the like. But then it was just time to construct something that had to be self-contained. This is a movie you don't have to have seen the first Critters to get and appreciate. And I wanted it to be something that stands on its own. And so I actually did not watch it much. You know, I haven't seen the first one in a long time, and it's time for me to watch it again. I remember the last time I saw it, Scott just looks like such a little boy in it.
He did, yeah. I mean, he grew up a lot in the couple of years between these movies.
Yeah, he's 16 in this. When we were doing it, he was 16 years old. These people can kiss my ass.
My ass. Yeah, this town voted me out in a landslide. This town can kiss my ass.
I loved working with. Now look, what a good match. This is a miniature set, obviously, but what Harv just drove out of looks just like this. And
yeah, I actually didn't really think about that until you just brought it up.
Yeah, I was very happy. And there is the real thing. And of course, this is the scene that people talk about the most. Finding the Playboy playmate and doing that. And Roxanne Kernahan was such a good sport. She had actually done a test shoot for Playboy. It was never published, but we had to talk to Playboy and get their authorization, and they signed off on us using it. And we were able to use an actual Playboy shoot of her for the movie. So those pictures of that centerfold was actually shot for Playboy, although it never ended up in there.
Oh, okay.
This is the day. It was like 22, 23 degrees in Santa Clarita. It's sunny, but it's freaking cold. And so here we go. And the transformation, again, very low tech, no CGI work in those days. Everything had to be done practically and optically. And so, let's make a boob appear. This is all latex naturally. Not that one.
No.
Anyway, so I don't know. It looks like they sculpted goosebumps on a couple of the latex shots. But so the staple was actually Bob Shea's idea. I wish I could take credit for it, but Bob Shea said, "What if we put the staple on her?"
That's a great idea.
It was brilliant. I love it. And you can tell by the grain that was blown up. I had not shot it close enough. And so we fixed it in post. But she was a real sport. She is no longer with us several years after this was made. She was killed in a car accident.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was like 93. It was like only 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
After you made this,
It's a very sad. She was really good and very funny and really talented and like I say, quite a sport. And the reason we didn't get an R rating was because although there's nudity, there's no sexual connotation to it.
Right.
There's no eroticism to it, as far as sexual activity and the like. So I was amazed that we got a PG-13 and delighted because it had to, by contract, come in at a PG-13. Normally, I'm not a big fan of PG-13 horror movies, especially these days, but we got away with some murder here.
Well, didn't it always strike you as more than a little bit hypocritical and just contradictory the way that the MPAA would have issues with violence, but you can machine gun 80,000 people to death, that's fine, but show a monster bite someone's head off, forget that. And then just like you just said, well, you can show boobs all you want. It just can't be sexual, which
Right.
is like, and this was during a period in the 80s where they were really cracking down on horror films left and right.
They hated horror movies. The MPAA did not like them, and they are anonymous members that you can't really do anything with. This passed pretty easily, but you have the same thing. Like in Sleepwalkers, we had a couple of scenes that I'd seen in movies many times, but in mainstream studio movies, but not in a Stephen King horror movie. That we had to make a lot of cuts there. This one, we got away with this stuff, which is a little bit R-rated, I would guess, and the nudity, but we were just very lucky. It's changed a lot.
Oh, yeah.
The movie
yeah.
Nightmare Cinema I did, we got an R rating on the first pass, and it's amazing because that goes further than anything I've had anything to do with before. Ryuhei Kitamura's segment on that is that here's our Warner Brothers time, interrupting myself. But, that was something that I'm proud to say was my idea. It's do the critter biting into the tire and blowing up and then squishing and then panning down to see a very Tex Avery kind of shot. And then talk about Warner Brothers cartoons. This is very much inspired by Chuck Jones, Tex Avery, that kind of thing here. And Herta was such a sport here and just really enjoyed playing with the puppets.
So talk a little bit about working with the Kyoto brothers, because, obviously their efforts have become synonymous with the Critters films over the years. And as much work as they did in the first film, this one's even more, over the top than what they did in the first movie. So out of all four, I think this is the one where they really had all the most to do. What was the give and take like? How did you work with the three brothers? Because it's unusual that you would have three different people, as the head of their shop. So what was that like?
Well, they're great. They have different specialities. The Ed was the producer. He was the business guy. Stephen was a director. They had just done Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which I loved, and talk about elaborate stuff on a shoestring budget. And then Charlie was the design artist. He's a great artist with pen and ink and all of that stuff. So the two of them, I don't know if you remember, again, old Warner Brothers cartoons where like there'd be one person with three heads that were the Three Stooges that were always bickering and poking each other in the eyes.
Right, yeah.
That's kind of what the Kyotos were like, but in a good way. They would bicker indeed, but it was always fun and funny. They are massively talented and have a really great style of their own. And often, we'd trade ideas a lot, and I would say things that I thought we needed for certain scenes and the like. But I also knew they knew better than I did how to do the puppetry and how to make it work. And they would take ideas that I would feed them or that were in the script and make them better. Here's what I think. What do you guys think? How would you approach this? Fortunately, they had Critters 1 under their belts and were able to start from there and then go on. But it's not fun doing all the puppetry. It's
I imagine not.
agonizing and time-consuming. I look at Gremlins, and I look at Gremlins 2 in particular and say,
God.
the hell did they do this? For one thing, Gremlins 2 had $60 million or something like that, 50 million.
Yeah, but still,
But
there's
still,
that
it's
scene at the end where
agonizing.
they're all in the lobby, and it's
Yes.
like there's a guy underneath every one of those things.
Yeah, I look at the Muppet movies and go, how on earth? And so we did this on a small budget, but with a really enthusiastic group. We had a second unit as well. Alan, you'll tell me the name. I've spaced on it right now, but he had done Forbidden World for Corman.
Oh, Alan Holzman.
Yeah, Alan Holzman was. I'll start again. So we had a second unit with Alan Holzman doing it, which was really elaborate and spectacular. And then the Kyotos themselves. So we had puppeteers. We had miniatures, and I'll point some of those out as they happen. But there were like 3 units shooting at a time often, and I would be running back and forth between the Kyoto unit, puppet unit, and my own. Alan would be shooting stuff at the Hungry Heifer because each of those shots has to be done one at a time and over and labor intensive, and make sure that a puppet is doing the right thing, his eyes are looking the right way, and
Right.
what it's biting is reacting properly. You know, that even though we shot that close up of the critter biting into the vent there in this scene, often critter shots were done by either Holtzman or by the Kyotos. Speaking of which, this scene we're about to go in the Hungry Heifer, everything you see that has Terrence Mann and Roxanne in it, we shot first unit. But every shot that you don't see them in was shot by Alan Holtzman, and over like at least a week or 2 of work here. The salad bar, that's all second unit stuff. And so we would talk about, okay, I want this kind of movement, this kind of thing, but Alan was the guy who had to make those decisions on the spot because it's so complicated. And then the magic of movies and the magic of post-production and editing is that you just take the pieces that work and put them together with other pieces that work, and presto changeo, you have a sequence.
Must be fun in the editing to try to put all this together.
Fun is one word for it. But
well, you were working with an editor with a lot of genre experience already. That was Charles Bornstein.
Yeah,
right?
Charles had done work on Halloween and on A Nightmare on Elm Street, and
Right.
he really had a lot of chops, and we had a good time together on this. He also did Psycho 4 with me later, and yeah, very good editor. Here's Warner Brothers time again. Eyeball pops. And some of the sound effects I did myself, like the eyeballs, I went, boing, 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 and then we sped it up and got
Right.
that effect. So,
And
this
I
is
love
one
the
of my
hair. I
favorite.
just
Yeah.
love this.
And that he likes it. Yeah,
Bitchin',
bitchin'.
yeah.
I did a bunch of the critter voices as well, including that one.
I always felt bad for the poor one, the guy boiled. I thought that was. too
I
bad.
know, it's mean, but
Yeah. Yeah,
and
they're mean
cuckoo
little
bird
bastards, you know.
sounds, the whole thing. We truly embraced our inner Chuck Jones here.
And then you had to have. I imagine there had to have been a title on set of Critter Roller. Because
Critter
you've got-
Wrangler. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of guys out there just rolling critters around.
Yes, and some of the there's some effects coming up here where you'll see like a critter ball chasing the truck and turning a corner and stuff. All it is just a fishing wire connected. That is, the guy has it connected to his leg, and it's chasing him. It's amazing what you can get away with. Like this, you can't see the wire. You can see the wire, but then you cut to, it looks like one ball. You cut to it hitting the post, and it's a different shot where 4 puppets are coming apart at the same time. So there's just so much you can do with practical effects that people don't bother to do anymore because they do it digitally, and you can fix everything, and it's less time consuming than actually doing it on the set. But you have the disadvantage of not having everything in front of the actors to respond to and give it a sense of veracity.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I like being able to do interviews and talks with the effects artists who did these movies back then, because I don't want to say that there's not an appreciation for it with the generation that's coming up, but there's just, and I understand it to a certain degree, this isn't something they've ever had to deal with. This wasn't something that someone who wants to do visual effects who's coming up today would have to really realize, because they're working with computer effects, they're working with an entirely different medium, and they're not aware of stop motion necessarily. They're not aware of forced perspective.
And
they're
that
not aware
ball
of
chasing him,
miniatures.
turning the corner and all, and it's just got an axis through the middle and a V that goes to a fishing line that is tied to the truck. So,
Right.
but thank God for CGI. When it's done
Oh,
right,
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't notice, and you can do things you've never done before. And so I'm not one of those guys who goes, practical is better all the time. Every tool, filmmaking is constantly evolving. And the evolution of the tools in a filmmaker's toolbox is fantastic because of all the opportunities to tell a story better and better. Everything you have. Sometimes the effects become the entire reason for being. For some films, it's all about the effects. But in a way to assist a filmmaker in telling a story, it's invaluable to have more tools in your pocket. But there's no better effect than Eddie Deason. There's only one of him, since there's no more Jerry Lewis. But
no.
But yeah, he's so much like that. And then her performance here is so funny, and the deflation of the breasts always gets a good reaction as well.
Well, I loved her bit when she was tasting the milkshake or whatever, and she's just everything else in the scene's going on, and she's just like, "What is this thing?" And oh my,
yeah, she's chewing the straw. Is that how I'm supposed to do? That was her. She ad-libbed that, and I embraced it. It was great, and that's one of the things. One of the jobs of being a director is knowing when to let good ideas in from everywhere else if a craft services person has a thought at the time. Now, that's when I was showing him how to use the gun and telling him not to blow the trigger yet. And then bam, this one here? Yeah, boom. So, but it's fun. The movie starts turning much more dark after this. As the sun goes down, here comes the beautiful Russell Carpenter shot right there. As that time transition happens and the town goes dark, so does the movie, and it gets quiet, and the music becomes less playful. Everything becomes less playful at this point, and it becomes a true invasion kind of story. We get playful again, but for now, it's like playing it straight and embracing that and not treating it like a comedy. I think comedy is best played straight anyway, unless you got a bunch of rubber puppets. So,
right.
And for some reason, I really love when you have actors in an actual cold location and you see their breath,
That's one thing I have to say. I've seen, modern CGI technology try to replicate that, and I can never buy it.
No, you can always tell because they're not breathing it. Somebody else was on a stage and they're just putting it in there.
Videotape rentals, what's that?
I know, I've heard of them before. But
what's a videotape?
Way before my time, right?
Yeah, we're young, yeah.
One of the great things about doing this movie for New Line was this. Being able to have a little cameo by not the living actor, but Freddy Krueger.
It's like, no, not this guy. No.
And you wouldn't believe how many people at film festivals and conventions and things will say, yeah, why didn't you actually use Freddy Krueger, get Robert Englund to do it? No, this is not a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. This is a fun moment in a film, and we don't want to take all of the attention off our movie and go, Freddy Krueger's here, and change
Although
everything.
That would have been hilarious to have Freddy Krueger in a bounty hunter outfit running around.
That would have, yes, yeah, especially if it were in her bounty hunter outfit. That
right, exactly.
A riot, yes.
And the thing is, knowing Robert, I'm sure he would have done that.
I'm sure he would have. I'm sure he would have. But, he would have had to go through all those hours of being made up again for a moment.
Yeah. But besides, I don't think he could have done it at this point. So I think they were in the middle of shooting, like 3 Nightmare films at once.
Well, I think actually they were shooting number 4, and there were 5 units shooting at the same time.
Oh, I've heard stories about all that to try to get that movie done.
Yeah, and it's amazing. The film came out great, and usually when you've got that many units working at the same time, it's because things aren't working. But in that case, it was so overloaded with brilliant effect sequences that they really needed it, and it really came together well. I mean, 3 and 4,
it did.
Really worked great. They kind of were a change in direction for the movie. And here, you take a beloved character and trash him.
That's that.
It's you play again, trying to play the drama straight, even despite the fact that she's being attacked by hand puppets made out of latex and fake fur. And of
Well, again,
course, we passed up the moment in the Hungry Heifer scene where her gun gets an erection, and that always that always gets a response too. And so I have to just give a salute to that.
well, you were using different guns. They're based off the same design from the first movie, but I interviewed the effects artist from the who created the gun in the first movie, and it was so unbelievably heavy that they almost couldn't hold it properly.
Really? Oh, I never
Yeah.
heard that story.
Yeah, that's why the guns on your movie were a lot lighter. Because
They
it was,
were, but they
Yeah.
also fired easily, if you ask Eddie Deason. So this was an effect that I was told was going to be really great. And basically, it's just a bunch of projections on a blank face. And it's the cheapest effect in the movie, and I think the least successful. It's one of those where it had a great plan, but it was so flat and so without texture and so not what I was hoping it would be. But it's in there briefly, as briefly as possible. And this movie was kind of pitched to me by Barry Opper as a modern Western. And this scene is where it feels, where the attempt was to make a John Ford scene, from a John Ford Western where all of the town comes together against the common enemy and in the church, and we're all holed up together because it's the only place that's safe and the only place we can all come together. And so we really played Barry Corbin's sheriff role as an old-time Western sheriff, just like a cowboy movie sheriff comes to the rescue of everyone and rallies the troops. So had a lot of fun doing that.
when you look back on the making of the movie and the actual physical production, what aspect of it for you, if you had to say, was the one that you were the most unprepared for? The one that you were kind of like, oh my God, I didn't think it would be quite this difficult.
I didn't think that the effects scenes would take as much time, and I didn't realize how much of the movie took place at night. It's never fun to shoot all night. I'm not a person who sleeps well in the day. I mean, even at night, it's sometimes challenging. By the way, this guy who's keeping watch over the kids is Tommy McLaughlin, the great director of Jason Lives, Part 6. Yeah.
Part 6, yeah.
Yeah, and he and I have been friends for a long time. We wrote a couple of scripts together, one for Amazing Stories, and we've written together a couple of times. And just a really great filmmaker and a really terrific, talented guy who was an actor first. So,
well, he was Star, the robot from the black hole.
He was. Yes, indeed, he was. And he was the, what's that bear creature in the John Frankenheimer movie?
The Prophecy?
Prophecy. He was the mutant bear in Prophecy. So
he's got quite a diverse list of credits.
And he's got a band now called the Sloths that he's lead singer in. That was together in the '60s, and they got back together a decade or so ago, and they're great, and they play all over the place.
Well, you've had some experience in that arena as well, obviously. So.
yeah. I had a life as a rock and roll singer, and it was great. But I'm happy to hide behind the camera now. And that tricycle was way too small for her, but that's what props gave us, and it was okay. And the gun-slinging Barry Corbin.
Again, what else do you need?
Yeah, exactly. Barry Corbin with 2 6-guns. He got the spin great on the right hand. The left, not quite so much.
Yeah, yeah. But who cares? It's Barry Corbin.
Yeah,
with
and
shooters.
with "I'm back" and spitting out the tobacco. Now that is an iconic moment, and he really knew how to do it. But yeah,
this was actually one of the first films I really associated the name Barry. When I really kind of started to recognize who he was. I had seen him in stuff before, but I have to be honest with you, every time I've seen him after this, whether it was Northern Exposure or even No Country for Old Men, the first thought in my head is, hey, it's Sheriff Hart.
Well, that's great. I mean, obviously, I think that way too, after having spent time with him and knowing his family and the like. But true pleasure. I mean, when you find an actor who is as great to work with as possible, I regret that I've never had the opportunity or the right role for to work with him again. But so many of the people on this movie really embraced it that it made it a lot easier. I'll tell you, the most challenging scene for me is coming up, but it's the chase between the truck and the giant critter ball. That was, I've never really done that kind of a chase scene before that or since, and I'm kind of happy with how it turned out, especially under the trying circumstances under which it was made. That is a miniature tabletop right there.
Oh, okay.
That shot of all of the critter balls coming together at night between all the trees and everything, those are all miniatures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, really.
Again, would
great
never
stuff.
have been able to determine that. So that's, again, I think sometimes in the end, the best special effects or the best production design are stuff that you never think twice about.
Well,
You
yes, if you do think about them, then we've not done our job completely. I mean, obviously, if it's critter balls,
Yeah.
hand puppets and the like of creatures that don't exist in life, that's something else.
Right.
So this guy was in Aflac commercials or something at the time, and that was all I'd ever seen him in. And I loved him. Again, a character actor with a great face who feels like he is that character, has a personality he brings to it, so he doesn't just exist for the 5 minutes he's in the movie, just bringing character to it. And so much of making films is finding actors who make you forget they're actors.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's people like Barry Corbin. I mean, you gave him some really important dialogue about midway through the film when, they're trying to coax him to come back.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry when you give dialogue to an actor like that because they just inherently know how to sell it.
Absolutely. And that's when a director steps out of the way. If you embrace what they do and give them the room to do it, when it's somebody like this who is so seasoned and so good. And I love this speech too.
Oh, yeah.
And it's quite the rallying cry. I don't know why a line like "you bunch of pussies" gets such a big laugh, but it always does, and it always seems to work with. Nowadays, it plays at festivals and things, particularly around Easter time. It still plays cinemas, special screenings and stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there are so many more people now who have seen it in a theater than when it came out. I mean,
Right.
I literally went to my local neighborhood theater up at Universal City Walk when it came out. On opening day, there were 2 people in the theater, and it was so
Wow.
depressing.
Oh, man.
I had Bob Shea on Postmortem, and we talked about this. He had a financier who was interested in investing a lot of money in New Line. And so he was in L.A. to meet with Bob, and they were going to have dinner on Hollywood Boulevard. And he said, I've got a new movie opening tonight,
Oh, no.
and you should come.
No.
And it's really,
No.
you're going to love it. The movie's great, and you'll see what our company is up to. So they had dinner at Musso and Frank, the most
Sure.
oldest and most famous eatery on Hollywood Boulevard. And afterwards, they went to the World Theater where the movie was opening. And they were early, and there was no line or anything. So no worries, no line. They'll come. People here always come at the last minute to the movies. They never came, and Bob
Oh,
never got the
God.
money from this financier.
Oh,
So
no.
I didn't know that until just last year, and it was gulp. Sorry, Bob. Sorry to fuck up your company.
Well, I mean, I would feel bad, except they did okay.
I think they've done fine, and Bob
Yeah,
sold for a lot of money to Warner Brothers. So.
Yeah, so I this was, it was just, if anything, the money just got to them a little bit later than it would have otherwise. So
A little later, yeah. It
Yeah.
was just a postponed investment. So,
right, yeah. But boy, that must have been a fun little postscript to get.
yes. Well, I'm glad he waited 30 years to tell me. The guilt would have been crushing. I could never work again.
Oh God, that's funny.
And I love how seriously Charlie takes the job here of distributing all the weaponry and stuff.
Well, I love the fact that, I mean, it's a small town, so you don't automatically, everyone doesn't have a rifle or anything. They're using stuff that they've got lying around because they don't have a whole lot.
Right,
So.
they go to the hardware store and loot
Exactly,
that
yeah.
and all. And what I also like is that we were able to use the extras over several different days that we were shooting. Often extras will work a day and then they're bored or they're doing something else and they don't show up the next day. But we got a lot of the faces you see over and over in the town, so it really does feel like a town that has a population.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, this is the most ludicrous montage in in film history, I think, of setting out frozen hamburgers and ketchup and French fries and things to attract the critters. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta be honest with you. This scene does not make me want to have a hamburger. It doesn't. It does.
Well, that's
not
good. I'm a
appeal to me.
vegan.
Well, yeah. That's. I mean, but it's just.
That's my favorite critter shot. It looks the most alive. Yeah,
that's great.
the chewing critter. I wasn't a vegan at the time this movie was made, but it certainly set the groundwork for me.
Well, yeah, it would. Yeah, because there's all the meat eating scenes in this movie is.
Kind of repulsive.
They're gross. They're gross. They're
Yeah.
just they're fucking gross, Mick. They're just really disgusting. And it's
Well,
just-
good. It is a movie that is supposed to make you go ick. So,
yeah.
and these again, a lot of second unit stuff here because it's so labor intensive. And this simple effect worked great. It's just a grid of axles running through the center of all of these critter
man.
balls. They're just rolling on their own, being pulled on a rope. And
Wow,
it's
that's
so
amazing. It
simple.
looks
and
great.
Look at that. It's
It looks-
just
you
these
couldn't
fake
do. You
balls.
could not do better than that.
Exactly, and yet today it would be done in CGI, and
Of
it
course
might
it all
look
would
great,
be.
but it wouldn't look as. That's me.
Oh,
My hands
was it you?
are
Oh, those are
doing
yours?
like some of the hands, not all of them, but yeah, I like to get my hands dirty. That's me. Meat, sticking my hands in real meat.
Yeah, that would do it.
Most of the hamburgers you see here, all of those hamburgers, those
Uh-huh.
are actually painted rice cakes. So
Oh,
there's
that's
a
funny.
little
So you're
inside
making a
scoop for
vegan.
you.
You're making a vegan statement without
Yeah.
people realizing it.
The last thing you want to do is spend the night with room temperature meat patties.
No, that would be a bad call for all involved.
Yeah,
That would be
it definitely would have
No,
been. So,
that's-
but the art department was a great idea to
Yeah, you
paint
can't
rice
tell.
cakes. It looks like hamburgers, and they're
Yeah.
really easy to work with.
Yeah, rice cakes don't have that. They're much better, less temperamental actors than rotting beef.
Yes, exactly.
It's just-
Yeah.
Oh man,
The
This is
value
this
of the
movie,
long
It's
lens.
just so much fun to watch because you
Ah,
keep.
thanks.
One thing I was wondering, did you cut a lot out in post production? Because the movie is very lean. It just keeps moving from one to the next. There's not a lot of side diversions. Did you end up cutting anything, any scenes or any plot points out later on, or?
Not really much in the way of scenes, but a lot of the scenes, all of the scenes had tightening to do. And Charles is a really good editor, and we work together well. And at that time, when I was new to directing, I hated the editing process because there are an infinity of choices.
Right.
And so when you can do anything, it's like, my God, what are we going to do here? And it's so labor intensive, but a really good editor knows the sense of what works and when to go to the right shot and the like. And, we work together with that, but at that time I would be in those rooms all day with him from beginning to end. Now I love the editing process because I've worked with really good editors, and I've learned the process over the course of 30 years. If I hadn't, I'd better get fired. But that multitude of choices is really, really can be intimidating, especially on an effects film like this, where you have to shoot so much footage just to get a little bit that works right.
And also, I don't think a lot of people, like actors in particular, don't acknowledge how valuable an editor is to their performance, because at the end of the day, you know, you could take the greatest performance of all time, all the raw takes and everything, and you give that to an editor who doesn't know how to fashion a coherent performance out of it, and that great performance is now terrible.
Yeah, it's easily done because you know, you want to give actors opportunities to do various takes and to give their input. Do, you know, okay, do this one for me, do this one with this, you know, various approaches to each scene, and then each shot is a different setup, so it's a different performance every time out. And building that, you know, you give an editor some guidance, you know, please use this take for this line, this would be a great one here, but you also want them to do their job and choose, make good choices on their own. So the first cut an editor does is so crucial because he does it away from you, just from your notes, because you're still shooting or you're just recuperating. And then you work together. But an actor shouldn't have to worry about what an editor's job is. They shouldn't need to think about anything about except the context that they are in at any given moment. But some of them want more input and some do not, and you have to learn that very quickly on how each of them works. So the concept of, the concept of the dolly shot here is incredibly important in this. This is shot in such a Spielbergian sense. That was my influence by my boss, Spielberg, at the time. Things like this where you just choose the moment where you just push right into faces. And, you know, this one looking right into the lens is one that can be really potent because actors are taught, and that stacked shot is so Spielbergian, but I mean, cheap Spielbergian, let me tell you, and not in widescreen.
Yeah, but still, it works.
It's eloquent. It really does something special. And that's another thing, too. I've never shot a widescreen movie, mostly because most theaters shrink the screen from top and bottom. And on a TV screen, you know, it's banded, so you get much less screen real estate. And I've never really done an epic that would benefit from that. I would love to do a widescreen movie one day, the right film, and everybody's doing it now, even stuff made for Netflix and for streaming and the like. And it's like, well, it's made to go onto a home screen. Do you really want less screen real estate when you're telling a story? So that's why I've never done it, but I do want to do that one of these days. And
well, Rick, it looks like the movie's over. They've beaten everybody back.
That's what I was just going to say. I love the fake out of this ending. You know, it feels like, it's over, and we've got this romantic thing. They're going to kiss. No, they're not. Here, they're finally going to do it, and then everything rumbles.
It's all good, and we can all go home. And,
yes. And believe me, people have started to walk out right before, okay, they're going to kiss. That's it. So, by the way, that explosion that happened was a mistake. I mean,
it was?
The Marty Brezin, the physical effects guy, set it all up beautifully to do the explosion and the like. And he said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, No, please, you do it. It was supposed to be multiple explosions, but the first explosion burned the wires for the other explosions that were supposed to take place. Fortunately, the first one was massive enough that it worked, and we had multiple cameras, but one of my favorite moments. So, anyway, it was going to be an even more elaborate thing. There are 2 giant critter balls here. That one is just inflated and has the pelts on it. Yeah, it's a big beach ball. And the other one is actually on an axle, and they are remote-controlled faces all put together. It had to weigh at least a ton. Wow. And the Kyotos were there operating the face expression. Now, two guys are pushing that. They're running and pushing that ball, and that's how great the visual effects. That was just giving it a push and letting it roll.
Sure.
But to create a tense chase scene with a truck and an inflated ball, that looks like a miniature, but it's not. That was just
okay.
because we sped it up.
Okay.
So it has that effect. But this chase scene had no second unit at all. It was all done first unit and at night and really exhausting. So that was being towed. Now, if you look close in this shot, there's two pair of legs behind that ball pushing it. You can see them. And then that's the one on an axle with an ATV that was connected to the critter ball and rolling that one there. And that's the inflated one. So this was incredibly complicated. And sometimes it was attached to the truck and sometimes not. But this, I'm kind of pleasantly surprised at how exciting a chase it actually turned out to be.
It's great. No, Mick, seriously, this is the greatest damn thing ever. I mean, it's just, it's you got a big rolling ball of monsters trying to eat people. I mean, come on. Again, every time, whenever I would stumble across a review that wasn't that kind of this movie, I'm like, what more do you want? I don't understand it.
The reviews were not good, and it's really kind of sad that my hometown paper, the LA Times, almost everything I've done that's been reviewed has been reviewed poorly there. So, ouch. But you have to have the hide of a rhinoceros to do work for public consumption.
That's true. And also, with the problem with a film like Critters 2 is it's a sitting duck with critics, because it's not only is it horror sci-fi, it's a sequel to a film they probably didn't like to begin with anyway.
Yeah.
And, so no matter what film you would have done, Mick, they weren't going to give you the time of day, probably.
Well, you don't do it for critics.
No, God, no, you don't.
If you do, you turn into a pretentious guy. This was funny. I showed it to Toby Hooper. He said, yeah, Mick, there's one thing here, and that stuff, you can see the debris in the explosion. No, Toby, we put that there so it looked like there was the remains of the blown up spaceship. And okay, that's cool, man. That's cool.
You do a good Toby, man. That's good.
Well,
it's like I miss him, man.
He was
so
a
much fun.
great friend. I love him.
Yeah.
He was kind of a Texan Jimmy Stewart.
He was. He absolutely was. He really was.
Yeah, he was great. And here, you really hope the audience goes with it, but you play the emotion, and the music plays it straight and goes to it. And here's our tribute to the lost Charlie. It's everybody's genuinely concerned about a character you hope the audience had fun with and embraced as well as the characters do in the story. And, other people, plenty of people are just going to find the movie laughable and silly and the like, but you take it really seriously. All of the actors had to take it seriously, and it plays the way it's supposed to. And then this coda is something that, is it tries to be a genuinely emotional moment, and I really feel it every time I see the victory. And of course, we have to pay off. Finally, they kiss, despite interruption after interruption.
I know, really, yeah, you got to do that.
Yeah. So Herta's line about when she gives him the spinach cashew cake was supposed to be spinach cashew loaf, which I think is even more disgusting. So.
Yeah, well, nothing about that sounds good at all.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't, yeah.
Nana the vegetarian. My grandmother, I called her Nana, so she was kind of inspired by my grandmother in a lot of ways. And I love he's got a Hawaiian shirt that's tucked in.
Yeah.
He's a Texan wearing a Hawaiian shirt,
So, Mick, now that, so much time has passed between when you did this movie and you've gone on to have a very successful career, what was the overall impact for you of this experience? I mean, not just in terms of the way the film turned out, which I think obviously has proven to be, very successful in terms of its creative potential, but in terms of the initial reaction it got, what impact did this have on your career at the time? And looking back at it now, What do you feel about it?
Well, I have great affection for this movie, aside from it being the first one. Um, you want at least one of two things. You want box office success or you want critical success. If you can have both, that's great. It had neither, but the people who liked it were really passionate about it. Um, you know, it was such an emotional commitment from everybody involved in the making of this movie. It was really hard to make because it was so demanding. Everything hard about making movies was in this movie. But I really love these characters, and the film being my first feature, as far as my career goes, probably Amazing Stories opened more doors as a writer and as a director than this did, but it also offered me my only opportunity to really do screen comedy.
Hmm.
And so, what came after this, Psycho 4 was the next movie, which is not a comedy.
New.
Um, but because I had done a feature and it is fairly well made, I think, just from a very objective perspective, the way it is put together and the construction of it is professional and polished, especially considering its budget. That did lead to me doing Psycho 4, and so beyond that, there was Sleepwalkers was the next one,
Hmm.
and Sleepwalkers is the one that really opened a lot more doors for me. This showed I could do a feature film and not fuck it up too badly unless you're a critic or somebody looking at the box office. Um, but it's something that I still have tremendous affection for, and this year is the 30th anniversary of my first festival with this movie in Sitges, Spain. And
Hmm.
30 years later, they're showing it again, and I'm going to be there for that as well as with Nightmare Cinema. So, it really, its life is much longer than anyone ever anticipated because pop culture is disposable by its very nature. But
Yeah.
bigger audiences see it now and they react to it as if it were a brand new movie. And the responses to the humor and the horror play now the way they were intended to play then with the audiences I've seen it with. And that means a lot. That's what you do it for. You don't, if you're making a movie only for yourself, you're masturbating. If you're making a movie
Right.
for an audience, and, it's like trying to make your movie be the popular kid at school. And this swell of music is so
Yeah.
grand, and that push in and everything is, the movement of the camera can have so much to do with the emotional
Oh, yeah.
content of a sequence. And I learned a lot about that working with Spielberg on Amazing Stories, that are things that I've put to use for 30 some years now.
And Mick, I would like to add a little bit of a personal story here regarding Critters 2. Back when I was first, I mean, I had been into horror for a couple of years at this point. I mean, just ravenously gobbling up whatever I could and learning whatever I wanted to. And I was a collector of VHS back then. You remember prices on VHS were $70,
Yeah,
$80
yeah.
for a tape.
They were intended for
And
rental, yeah.
yeah, sell through wasn't really something that had come into play at that point. And I had the option at one point to join the Columbia House Video Club. I'm sure for those of you who remember, get 5 movies for a penny and just pay retail price for 3 of them over the next year or something like that. I forget what the
RCA
deal was.
Columbia, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't want to do it because it's like I'm never going to have this kind of money, and I don't. And then also the selections they had at that particular was like I'm not. There's a couple here I wouldn't mind. Well, I did join because one of the movies they had was Critters 2.